Depending on how well our species cares for our home planet, we may be embarking on an interstellar journey in the next few centuries, or even if we do a fantastic job taking care of our Earth, at some point the sun is going to make Earth a far less habitable place, making an interstellar journey or an interstellar colonization effort far more necessary than it is right now. But the problem is, how are we going to travel from star to star when doing those sorts of things takes decades at best and centuries at worst? Because it's difficult to tell whether or not we'll ever be able to engineer a ship that's capable of traveling very close to the speed of light. We may find that the only realistic way to carry thousands of colonists and millions of tons of cargo from one stellar system to another requires a generation ship, something that will take centuries to arrive at the destination rather than a few years or a few decades. And so this is what the Project Hyperion contest was all about, exploring the feasibility of crewed interstellar travel via generation ships using current and near-future technologies, a hypothetical spacecraft designed for long-duration interstellar travel where the journey may take centuries to complete. The idea behind a generation ship is that the initial crew would live, reproduce, and die on the ship, with their descendants continuing the journey until reaching the destination. These ships are often envisioned as self-sustaining ecosystems, featuring agriculture, habitation, and other necessary life support systems to ensure survival across multiple generations. The Initiative for Interstellar Studies, by means of this Project Hyperion design competition, came up with a design called Chrysalis, although in my opinion, it kind of looks like a large Oumuamua. Long, cylindrical, and much bigger than Oumuamua, 58 kilometers in length, but designed to carry 2,400 people. 2,400 people who are probably members of various families whose objective would be to safely deliver their descendants, or at least create an environment where their descendants would survive generation after generation to ultimately arrive at their destination 4 centuries in the future. Could something like this actually happen? We're going to explore that question in just a moment. Good afternoon, spaceflight enthusiasts and alien enthusiasts, and welcome to a special episode of The Angry Astronaut, designed to be sort of a hybrid episode that might appeal to both UFO fans and spaceflight fans, because we are talking about quite a remarkable concept for a spacecraft, something that probably would be a little bit more comfortable in the world of science fiction than science fact, an immense generation ship, a ship designed to take over 2,000 prospective colonists to the nearest star, or to another nearby star if it happened to be home to a planet that was more habitable than any of the planets in our solar system. This was part of a serious scientific competition, engineering competition that also involved architects, psychologists, wide variety of experts who were asked, what if we had to build a generation ship? What if traveling between the stars at a substantial percentage of the speed of light, fast enough to get from one star to the next in a human lifetime, proves to be impractical or impossible? There are powerful arguments to be made for that, because even though Einstein's theories and Einstein's equations do not forbid us from traveling very close to the speed of light, 99.9% of the speed of light in principle is just fine. But the problem is that getting to that speed requires an immense amount of energy. Just accelerating a few tons of mass to that kind of velocity is absolutely insane. It's an easy thing to see when you just look at probably the most famous mathematical equation in history, E equals mc squared. If you look at energy being a function of mass times the speed of light. And so therefore, if you're able to convert mass into pure energy, that is to say, all the atoms in any given object into pure energy, the amount of energy that you got out of that object would be absolutely immense. The mass of the object times the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second squared, results in a huge number, therefore a huge amount of energy. When you have a nuclear blast or a fusion reaction, something along those lines, which produces enormous amounts of energy, only a small percentage of the object in question, of the fuel involved in creating that reaction, is actually converted into energy. If you convert all of a given object into energy, the resulting amount of energy is absolutely staggering. And that's what you need. That's the kind of energy that you need in order to accelerate a given mass up to anything close to the speed of light. A huge amount of energy, perhaps more energy than we can practically create. And so therefore, if we want to travel from star to star, if there comes a time that our solar system is no longer habitable, it may require that we travel at a small percentage of the speed of light, perhaps only 1% of the speed of light, especially if we're having to carry enormous amounts of cargo and enormous amounts of passengers. And of course, if you're traveling at 1% of the speed of light, you're not going to get even to the nearest star in a human lifetime. We're talking about centuries. We're talking about generations. And if the concept of suspended animation or some other way to keep a human body alive for centuries proves also to be impractical, there's going to be no way of traveling to another star system without it being a multi-generational endeavor. But at some point in the future, that may prove to be necessary. At some point, our solar system is going to become uninhabitable. The sun is going to change. The sun is going to become more energetic before it dies, rendering at least Earth an uninhabitable place. Perhaps Mars might prove to be habitable a bit longer, might become a more pleasant place to live for a while, but then the sun will also start to bake that planet. Might have to move out to Titan and other moons of the Jovian worlds, or perhaps we might seriously start to explore other worlds, because if we're talking about that far in the future, we may find more promising worlds that are relatively close to our own star system. Proxima Centauri, although there are problems with red dwarf stars that may make whatever planets orbited uninhabitable, the nice thing about red dwarfs is that they last a very, very long time. And of course, Proxima Centauri is a red dwarf star. Unlike our sun, they don't become more and more energetic as they grow older in the space of just a few billion years, changing dramatically. These are stars that can last hundreds of billions of years. They can have a lifetime that defies our understanding, our comprehension, far longer than even the total theoretical age of the universe as we know it now. There are red dwarf stars, at least in theory, alive today that came into existence shortly after the universe came into existence, and they're still around today. So perhaps a planet orbiting one of these stars might prove to be a better target. But if you can only get there with a generational ship, you're going to need a ship that's going to be comfortable, a ship that's going to more closely resemble a world than a transport. But if it becomes necessary for the human species to abandon our home system, it might be a ship very much like this that allows us to survive. So once again, the winning design was called the Chrysalis and was comprised of a team of 5 experts in a variety of different fields to try to figure out what the best way to get multiple generations of human beings to survive on a very long journey from one star to another. This included an architect and designer, an economic scientist and social innovator, an astrophysicist and space mission engineer, an environmental engineer who's also a freelancer artist, and a psychologist. The mission objectives are as follows. Number 1, the interstellar spaceship will safely transfer a population of at least 1,000 people, hopefully 50% men and 50% women, to the planetary system of Proxima Centauri at the distance of approximately 4 light years from the Sun. The spaceship will enter a stable medium Earth orbit around the planet Proxima Centauri b to deliver safely on the surface of the planet the inhabitants and cargo payloads in a previously operational settlement, to preserve cultural, biological, and technological heritages from the Earth as well, maximizing diversities, capabilities, and technologies. The spaceship needs to perform the transfer in at least 400 years to guarantee stability and self-sufficiency for the entire spaceship population, to preserve society unity and identity, keeping inhabitants psychologically healthy. That's a tough one. And the habitat module shall provide Earth-like ecological environments. So the generational ship Chrysalis is named after the intriguing possibility of having a spaceship capable of keeping its inhabitants safe and united generation after generation until they arrive in the new solar system. As the generations pass, the population of the Chrysalis will adapt to the new environment, particularly in psychological terms. Spatial boundaries, time perception, and theological identities will change during the journey, and each generation of travelers will develop its own culture, vision, and values before reaching the new planet. At the heart of this study of space exploration lies the sense of belonging and the motivation behind interstellar missions. What will it be like to arrive in a new solar system and adapt to a new exoplanet after a journey lasting hundreds of years? Perhaps future generations will be so accustomed to life in deep space that the prospect of landing on a new planet will seem irrelevant, and they will instead feel that they are unique beings with their own spaceship home. They will be creatures of the cosmos, a new line of evolutionary development in deep space, formed through the symbiosis of humans, advanced technologies, artificial intelligences, and cyberspace in a confined biosphere. The personal decision to volunteer for an interstellar mission should be of paramount importance to its inhabitants. Abandoning Earth could have dramatic psychological consequences in the long term. When designing the Starship, we considered these issues with a clear understanding that, for the future inhabitants of Chrysalis, feeling part of an epic and sacred journey for humanity will be crucial. Now, the departure phase takes approximately 1 year, accelerating at 0.1 Gs for about that 1 year time frame will deliver a speed of 1% of the speed of light. Now, that may not sound all that impressive, but 3,000 kilometers per second is actually insanely fast. We're talking about Earth to Mars in less than 3 hours, Earth to Jupiter in less than 2 months, Earth to Pluto in 18 months. Now think about that for a moment. We're talking about a journey of 400 years, and your journey through at least familiar destinations throughout the solar system would be over with in far less than 1% of that total journey. The vast majority of the time that our passengers would be in space would be in interstellar space, in vast emptiness. Deep space doesn't even begin to describe just how isolated and lonely this experience would be, which of course is one of the reasons why this ship needs to be a pleasant home for the humans on board and not the ultimate destination. Now, how do you build a ship this utterly massive? Well, the idea is to begin construction at Earth-Moon Lagrange Point 1. That's sort of a parking lot between the two solar system bodies where gravity balance one another out. when you put something at a Lagrange point, it tends to stay put without having to use a whole lot of fuel to maintain its location. And then, once you have construction started at that location, the vast majority of the raw materials can come from the moon. Aluminum, silica, metal alloys from lunar minerals and regolith, and also the vast majority of the propellant would come from the moon too, because this ship would use fusion propulsion with helium-3 as the primary propellant, with also deuterium mixed into the equation. So deuterium, helium-3 fusion. Now, the vast majority of this ship's mass and volume would be taken up with propellant, not all that different than a conventional rocket. You're using fusion power, but you're trying to get an enormous amount of mass, up to 1% of the speed of light, which still requires a colossal amount of propellant, both helium-3 and deuterium. We're talking about a total mass of 2,400,000,000 tons, with an overall length of 58 kilometers and a diameter of 6 kilometers. The back module alone weighs 2 billion tons, with the front module weighing 100 million tons. The entire habitat structure weighing only 4 million tons. Yeah, that shows you how much propellant is required, at least if you're using an understood method of propulsion, something that we can foresee existing sometime in the near future, to get something really heavy up to a substantial percentage of the speed of light. Yeah, even 1% of the speed of light requires an insane amount of fuel. Now, the Chrysalis habitat modules are quite intriguing because they're like a bunch of Russian dolls nested inside one another, with each shell serving a different purpose. We'll go ahead and start with the outside orange shell, Shell 1, the food production and ecosystem shell, followed by communal spaces in Shell 2, the green level, and then the blue level being the dwellings for the residents. Then you have facilities in Shell 4, the purple level, and then the gray area in the center, Shell 5, is the warehouse. And then finally, the dark gray level at the center is the axial frame that holds the entire ship's structure together. And you also may have noticed that these shells are rotating at different speeds, because the further out the shell is, the slower it needs to rotate in order to generate 1g worth of artificial gravity. The further in it is, it has to rotate a little bit quicker in order to also generate 1g of artificial gravity. And interestingly, the designers have each individual shell illustrated. For example, the orange shell, the agriculture in biomes, that's at the bottom right, then the dwellings, which is one square up, and then the axial core further up from that, and then you drift over to the left, and to the bottom left, you have the communal spaces also illustrated, along, of course, with facilities and the warehouse. So yeah, quite a lot of detail put into this design. And by the way, the agriculture and biome levels, that's probably my favorite, because it kind of reminds me of Silent Running. The entire idea is to have a wide variety of biomes on this level, not just one type, but tropical forests and boreal forests, dry scrub biomes, all sorts of variety, and also a considerable amount of variety on the agricultural side. Although when it comes right down to it, a vegetarian diet is required, although animals might be on this structure in order to provide some kind of biological diversity, perhaps aesthetic purposes, to bring a little taste of home along with the travelers. It just wouldn't be efficient to slaughter animals on a structure like this and to keep this many people alive. To transfer over to a purely vegetarian diet would make maximum use of the agricultural ecosystems. We're talking about enough food to support 4,800 people on a sustained basis. In other words, enough space for a growing population. Although a population that could not grow out of control. If it did, then we would be running into food shortages, riots, and disaster. And by the way, another advantage to having these types of natural ecosystems is they could create what's called a controlled ecological bioregenerative life support system, or CLBLSS. In other words, a recycling life support system that recycles in the same way as a natural ecosystem does, making it a lot easier to produce the necessary atmosphere, all the necessary purified water, and other things that are necessary to sustain a large population of humans and the plants that sustain them. So what is the daily life of an inhabitant of this ship like? Well, it goes into a lot of detail on that as well. A typical day for a chrysaling in his or her 30s begins with caring for his or her child. In weekly shifts, the care of the offspring is assigned to the biological father and mother for the first 10 years of life. Occasionally, the biological couple also spends time together. However, to maintain a broader sense of community within the spacecraft, each parent lives individually in his or her living unit within the shell. The children spend a lot of time with their parents, and the rest of the time they play and learn with other children, where there are schools and recreational areas. Adults, in addition to spending time with their children, spend the rest of their time performing work and service activities. In Chrysalis, people can access all the information about different activities to be done and their priorities: service, maintenance, education, agricultural production, industrial production, and scientific research. Chrysalis AI Agent Systems manages the priority activities to be done by integrating them with the choices and decisions of the Chrysalis Society. Each inhabitant can access the database of tasks to be done and assign themselves tasks to do based on their skills, educational background, and priority. Of course, the time required for services is tuned to the age of individuals. Before the age of 30, there's more emphasis on education and development, while after 60, there's more room for leisure, arts, and culture. Now, as far as government is concerned, we're only talking about a few thousand people here, so the idea is to break these people down into various think tanks based on their specializations, their education, what they're best at, that sort of thing, and all of these different think tanks come up with different plans as to what they want the community to do. And then once they have those plans figured out, they feed those plans into artificial intelligence agents, and the AIs tell them the best way to resolve these things, to do the sorts of things that they want to do based on the plans that they fed into the AI. Of course, the idea of an AI-controlled society is a little strange, but at the same time, keep in mind that the AIs are not actually deciding what people do and where their priorities are going to be. They simply take the data that is fed into them and then provide a plan that best accomplishes the objectives that were communicated to them by these think tanks. So the AI doesn't have total control over society or anything, although I can certainly anticipate a future where these AIs evolve as time goes on and take control of their human subjects, simply because they also control life support and other things that are rather critical to these people's survival. In any event, as the ship closes in on its destination on Proxima Centauri, there's one other feature of the ship that comes into play. It is called the Cosmos Dome. The dome hosts the annual Chrysalis Plenary Council, where all inhabitants gather in a full circle. The solemnity of the setting and the ability to accommodate the entire population is paramount in maintaining a sense of unity and harmony amongst the inhabitants. The dome faces back towards the origin of the spaceship's journey, the sun and the earth. This allows the inhabitants to look back to their distant origins, giving them a deep sense of connection to their home planet and their final mission. But keep in mind, this is the only way to see into deep space from the ship. People's attention are focused almost exclusively on the ship itself and the environment they live in, not on the environment outside. Not a bad idea, because you would feel rather isolated and alone in deep space otherwise, but it's good to have a regular reminder of where you are and where you are going. And then upon arriving in Proxima Centauri, the ship turns around. The Cosmos Dome now faces the destination, and now you communicate to the final generation on the Chrysalis that they have arrived at their destination and a decision needs to be made. Will they stop here? Are they going to make a new home for themselves on Proxima B, or are they going to continue their journey through the cosmos on the Chrysalis? In my opinion, given how many generations will have lived on this ship, probably at least some of the population will want to stay here, carrying their unique brand of the human species out into the cosmos. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, one of the reasons that I found this design to be so compelling is because it kind of looked like a Oumuamua, or might look like a Oumuamua, may or may not appear. We're not sure if Oumuamua is a thin disk or a thin cylindrical object. We're probably never going to know that for certain. But to me, this kind of looked like a Oumuamua, very long, far thinner than it was long, etc., and a much more artificial looking object. But the question I ask myself is, if this vessel were to pass through our solar system today, would we recognize it as being an artificial object, even if it were as immense as the ship that we just talked about in this video, 58 kilometers in length? Well, we can have a look at this particular asteroid called 216 Cleopatra, approximately double the length of the ship that we're talking about today, and you don't get a whole lot of details, even with the best telescopes that we have at our disposal. And given our obsession with the whole principle of with extraordinary claims must come extraordinary evidence, no matter how artificial this object might look, if we could not get a very clear spectrographic picture of its composition, and if it never gave off any signals, if we sent out signals to it and it never responded, might it be possible that the scientific community would simply call this some very unusual, some sort of artificial-looking asteroid, but an asteroid nonetheless? To call it anything else would just be inflammatory and irresponsible because it hasn't signaled to us, it's not demonstrating any sort of behavior that would suggest that it's an artificial object, etc., etc. Might this also be the case, especially if this wasn't its ultimate destination, if this was an object simply passing through our solar system on its way to another destination, so it never came particularly close to our planet? We actually recognize it for what it is? Or would we continue to stick our heads in the sand and deny that we had actually seen a massive generational ship making its way through our solar system? I have to admit, no matter how obvious the evidence might be, we might very well choose to remain completely ignorant of it. What do you think? I'd like to see your opinions in the comments. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, this weekend is your last opportunity to get this 200K merchandise. We have it for alien fans and space flight fans. As I mentioned before, these are extremely comfortable shirts, extremely comfortable garments, far more comfortable than anything else that I've sold on this channel. And the designs are really fantastic. So if you want to take advantage of this, we've extended the offer through the weekend, and then that's it. On Sunday at midnight UK time, this store will be closing down. So if you want to take advantage of it, once again, this is your opportunity. Or if you'd like to support the channel in some other way, all the details are in the description. So until next time, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.